Be it's different because we all come from different backgrounds. I might be married to somebody Sioux, so that's going to look slightly different, right? I might be married to somebody non-Indigenous. That's going to look different, right? And so there's going to be different influences, whether it's from the church, whether it's from other Indigenous backgrounds, um, whether it's not really coming from any portion of faith, right? So, our spirituality. So it's going to look different. There's going to be different things that are accepted. Um, but for as Plains Cree Indigenous people, coming from the Indigenous perspective, there is certain ways that we try to, child rear. There's certain things that work for us. There's certain things that work for us as a collective, right? So, yeah, definitely gonna always be different approaches, right?
So, Jerry, you mentioned different ceremonies like child's first laugh ceremony, and down south, you're mentioning it's different. So, what do you need when these ceremonies are being done? What exactly do you need? And what
So,
what what are the things you need to gather, or is there any protocol? Um, what's the cost involved?
so it could be, well, just for personal experience and understanding and knowing our relatives from down south, meaning Navajo Nation area. Some of the things that they share is like when the child first laughs. Um, this is supposed to be a big ceremony, so it's anything that your family can contribute. So it could be $2,000, $5,000. It could be $500. Um, but basically, to give as much as you can for this child, because at the end of the day, it's like you're taking blessing away from that. But it's everything from the food, making the food, to preparing giveaway, to doing the ceremonial portion and getting the right people involved to carry out the ceremony. So this individual now has that task to essentially be an event planner for this child, to honor this child, and that's the responsibility of that entire family dynamic, whoever made this child laugh, right? So it's kind of like a hefty, might come with a hefty price tag, basically. So that's kind of how we understood it from our relatives. Um, whereas Plains Cree territory, a lot of times it was just ceremony. It was doing the berry ceremonies and just giving thanks.
So, Jerry, I've heard that when people go for ceremonies, you should not carry a child because this means that you could somebody could take your child, like you could give away your child. Is that true?
Not necessarily that, but it's in particular to dancing, right? Like let's say we're at a dance and in that essence of dancing, you're giving out energy, right? You're dancing, you're moving, and you're trying to heal, right? But at the same time, when you're dancing, holding your baby, the essence is like you're giving it away, right? You're it could be understood that in a spiritual sense, right? So I might be at an event and I might be like, I wouldn't be saying, oh, you're gonna give me your child. I'm totally not saying that. It's understanding the spiritual portion of it is things like sudden infant death syndrome. So the spirituality of me dancing with my child and holding my child up like this might be construed in a spiritual sense that I'm saying, Creator, you can take my child back. Days later, when we're relaxing or doing something at home, child doesn't wake up. Maybe the child rolled over in their crib, you know. Maybe somebody was bouncing the child and they bounced the child a little too hard and they didn't realize it, right? Maybe something happened suddenly, um, that the child, unfortunately passed away. That is the significance of the spirituality of, in certain incidents, don't be mindful of when you're holding your child up, right? That there's certain ceremony where we hold the child up, where we talk to the child, and then we pass the child to the next person. They hold the child, they talk to the, and there's those type of ceremonies. But when you're dancing and you're holding the child, some of them will be like, oh, there's only certain times you can dance, certain times you can do certain things, and especially when you're um, when there's special times, basically, right? And so to be mindful of those situations, because we don't know, there could be a whole spiritual realm, or there couldn't be. But if there is a spiritual realm and something happened, that could be the understanding of why that happened, right? That we don't know, but there's something bigger at play that we're totally unaware of. And maybe that's what it was understood at. Okay, they want me to come grab the child. They're offering the child back to me, right? So yeah, that's why they say be careful. There's certain times where you can hold a child, but in essence, it's not saying, here, give my child away. But the unfortunate thing, though, the flip side of that, when we look at today's society and law correction, um, law correction has put so much dependency on people as a whole that because I, as a person, might know that this system is in place in case I decide that I don't want to carry out my responsibility as a parent. Well, I can just go to the system and say, here, take my child. I can't raise my child anyways. I'd rather be dependent on your system so I can get these free handouts. I need supports. I can't raise this child. So it's gotten to the point where in society we've okayed it and we have allowed it for parents to come right out and say, here's my child, take my child. So there's that side of it too, that when we talk about holding a parent responsible for that obligation of having that child, that we need to have systems in place like that. When we talk about indigenous approaches, um, we're seeing a lot of that since Bill C-92 has come into place, where we can take those approaches of keeping our children and our families and our communities accountable for the child well-being, right? And that whole entire family dynamic of everybody's responsibility and obligation to that child, right? And so we're seeing more of those, and how important that Bill C-92 is to allow Indigenous peoples to take control of their own legislation, to take those approaches to child rearing, right? It's unfortunate, but you hear stories like that where parents do step forth and they're like, I can't take my kid. Here you go. Um, and ultimately, children come into the child care system in floods, right? And it's crucial and it's important that we need to have those discussions on how we begin to change those systems so that they can take more honorable approaches, or even be inspired by indigenous philosophy and approaches. Yeah.
You're working with the Children's Services agency right now, correct?
Cor- Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so from working with the indigenous band, First Nation with Louisville, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what other cultural practices do you all offer for your clients on on the
So,
reserve?
so the interesting thing about how I landed in Louis Bull is they have a very unique law, um, and everything that the law, how it is developed and how it is written, is to support nationhood and nation sovereignty from a prevention base. So when you talk about learning the language and doing programming that influences that from the child to the parents to the whole community, that's prevention in itself. If you talk about culture, tradition, ceremony, sports, all of these different things, those are all levels of prevention, even life skills, levels of prevention. But from an indigenous aspect, at the end of the day, it's strengthening the identity of that nation, which is enhancing nation sovereignty. But when you take basic CFS standards and you hold those standards higher than nation standards, and we put nation down here, you continue to take away and limit the power and the sovereignty of that nation. So that's the approach that is in that law. The way it's written, the way it's articulated is um, it's any element of nationhood that becomes your prevention basis and your approach as to how you're going to build up that society, that family, but the nation as a whole, which is ultimately going to benefit the nation's sovereignty. Um, in Musquecheese alone, we have a good bowl of different resources and different approaches, right? So you have Kasokaware, which is under the province when it comes to their CFS. Montana is pretty much in the same boat. But then you have Ermineskin who delegates the CFS authority out to the province. So basically, they don't have a CFS organization, but they more so have a prevention organization. But basically, the role of CFS is administered from the province, and then somebody was trying to get in to clean my room. Excuse me. Yep. No, thank you. Sorry, guys. Uh, so yeah, basically, oh, okay, yeah. So within there, you have Ermineskin who delegates it out to the province. So they don't even have a CFS function in the nation, right? And then where you have Louis Bull, who's taken the Bill C-92 approach. And when you talk about jurisdictional issues and jurisdictional approaches, that their nation's law prevail over provincial and federal jurisdiction as to how they're going to raise their children and support their children to the best of their abilities. And so when you look at those approaches, it's definitely something that is treaty based. It's definitely something that continues to aid in the sovereignty of the nation. Um, all of the elements that have been crippled by us from the INAC style of system and approach, um, this approach starts to mend that, starts to build that up again. When you look at the current INAC style of system, it's to ask in layers, and as you ask in layers, you weaken the sovereignty of those nations, right? So, um, right now where I'm at, amazing law, amazing approach, definitely a good learning field. But it's definitely something that the rest of First Nations and the rest of Canada and the provinces can look at as to how we administer, better services that are beneficial to our Indigenous population, but even our non-Indigenous population as well too.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, I really enjoyed I really enjoyed your teachings and the fact that I think kind of the basis of what kind of you're saying is that with development, with child development is really based on identity and how a community comes together and helps support a child's strengths. So in the child intervention system, if you have kids that if they couldn't be placed with family or kinship and they're in foster care, like, do you have any suggestions about how we as a community can come together and help them, um, first of all, identify what their strengths are as children, um, and how we would nurture that in a really culturally sensitive way?
Mhm. Uh, Great question. Um, I think the beauty of it is that information can always evolve. It can always come from you, the service providers, right, as a collective. Um, and for me, like when you think about different suggestions and different approaches, just kind of looking back on how we were as a society in the past, um, we adopted children. If we noticed that there was a family struggling, maybe there was a loss of the family, maybe something significant happened where the children are displaced, right? We stepped in, we supported. If we knew where the children came from, we tried to influence them to, or at least have that avenue of knowledge open for them. That, let's say I'm Cree, and I'm raising a Sioux child, at least be able to reach out to, the Sioux Nation and to get acquainted with somebody that could offer that knowledge and that support to that child, right? Then at least that way they still have that, but they also have my influence as to how I want to support this child, right? In the best way that I see fit. But for me as a parent, it also helps me evolve because I'm learning from the Sioux Nation or whoever the Sioux teacher is, right? I'm being able to adapt to that. I'm being able to grow with my child, but at the same time to be open-minded to their beliefs, right? And that those beliefs can go hand in hand. And as they become an adult, they can lead how they see best fit, right? Um, when we talk about having that open approach, it was understood that our people were nomadic, but not nomadic in a sense where we went anywhere, and there was no reason why we went to certain areas. So not that nomadic, but nomadic in a sense where we moved with Mother Nature and we were always living off the land. We knew which sites to go to. We knew which places to pick certain medicines, certain tools, certain woods. But the economic system that we had was because we moved with Mother Earth, we were able to take goods and services and share them as we went along the way. And with that being said, uh, we would have people that would join our societies, and sometimes our people, like a mission, would go join other societies, so that next time we come back around, we had spokespeople that understood languages of other nations, but we also had people that were in our societies that could speak that language too. And so we were always learning, always growing, and we were multi language experts basically, right? Linguistics that way, right? So definitely we're always influenced, and for me, it's like that's the beauty of caretakers is you have any influence, and any way is the best way. But when you're trying to think of how can we support this child, as long as you're supporting that child, that's the biggest step, right? And even more so if you know where the child's coming from, then you know how to get the supports that could be beneficial to them, right? And but at the same time, it's understanding and knowing where you come from too, and sharing those expertise. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess on a funny note, I'm always going to be looking at a child and seeing where they're looking and after they bend over and look between their legs. I'm
Especially
going to
like if it's a
share
little
that.
toddler. Yeah. Don't look at me, don't look at me. Or else they'll go like this and they'll see the child. Oh, don't look at the kid, don't look at the kid. But yeah.
There's always humor in all these sessions. It's really nice to know what each of us, what we pick up. So, Jerry, tell us about the naming ceremony. Like giving a child a name and giving an adult a name. When is it done? Is it done before a child is born for a child? And you know, how many Cree names do you have? Like, how many Cree names can a person have?
And I think that's the beauty of it is with everybody it's different. Um, Before I was born, before my older brother was born, I think it was about 4 or 5 years before we were born. My late grandfather from Rocky Boy, Montana, wasn't the direct grandfather, but in kinship terminologies, the way my late grandfather um, adopted people as his brother, or else even through distant relationship, were related that way. So he was a grandfather through kinship. Actually, before we were born, so he spoke with my father and he said, in the future you're gonna have two sons. The first son, I want him named this. The second son, you're gonna name him this. And so that's how our names were given to us growing up, me and my older brother. And then the interesting thing is with my middle son, he's 11, and already he has three names, right? And so there's a name for specific things, right? Specific gifts that they have as they grow, and those names they just come, right? Especially from the people that still have those abilities to give names. So he has three. The youngest and the oldest, they only have one to my knowledge. I don't know, two each. So there's different reasons as to why you would use those names. One specifically for ceremony, and then one is what they're, everybody knows them as, right? And so um, these are the names that they grow up with. And so when we think about how important a name is, I'll ask everybody, have you ever had one of those moments where you have deja vu and you're like, wow, I know this place, I've seen this place before, or I've been here, before. Well, a lot of times what we hear is the reason why it's important for us to give our children names and for us to have indigenous names is we're told that our spirit has the ability to travel ahead of us. And especially when we're telling people that we're going to go over here to this distance, to this certain place, our spirit can travel over there. And if we procrastinate and we decide not to go over there, that's when sometimes you lose your mind, you get sick easily, you get unhealthy. um, Certain things happen like just like that. You fall, you trip, you break your leg, random stuff like that happen. And that's why they always said it is, instead of saying you're going to do something, just do it. If you're going somewhere, instead of telling everybody you're going to go, just do it, right? So that was our belief as to how important and sacred our names are. And when we get into those situations where a trauma happens, you can spook that spirit, that namesake, right? Your keeper away. So something happens, right? And so our elders always remind us, call yourself back, call your spirit back. And so then you as an individual, I would say my Cree name, and in that essence, I'm bringing that back to me, right? So that's how important, our names were. And it is important for Indigenous children to have Indigenous names, but to also get those teachings as to why those names are important, right? And so a lot of times we miss that boat is, oh, I have an Indian name, but we don't understand, and no one can comprehend why we need those names. Um, but they're very important to who we are as a people, as a society. Um, Before the foreign governance systems that were forced upon our nations, we had clan systems right across Indian country. Our relatives in the mountains, I'm actually here in Vancouver, but a lot of our relatives out here, they practice that clan system. They honor it, they nurture it. Our relatives out east, Mohawk territory, out in that area, they still have their governance. They still have their clan systems. And so as you go throughout the plains, uh, a lot of that is lost, right? So there is still that belief that with continuous work and development, those types of systems can come back into place, right? And so, yeah, no, that's pretty much along the lines. I
Hi. Jerry, one more question. Tell us about how did you learn the language, the Cree language? Is it different from how your children are learning the Cree language? Every age, and you mentioned another point, like we did have a written system, the syllabics, you know.
Mhm.
So, and with this new age, with technology, is there a difference um, in how you learned the Cree language and how your children are learning the Cree language?
Mhm. So for me, coming from the addictions field, I understand trauma now. I understand the effects of positive learned behaviors, of negative learned behaviors. I understand the effects of of learning and the education system, and how that can be transitional in somebody's learning or transformative in somebody's learning. Um, it's told to us and it's understood that the indigenous languages of the world are straightforward. They're direct. They don't beat around the bush. Um, for instance, it's almost along the lines of a law of attraction, but at the same time, it's language, right? So, if I'm asking if I'm asking to, let's say I have a drinking issue, and if I'm asking not to drink anymore, from the indigenous perspective, I'm gonna say, well, I'm gonna focus more on drinking water. I'm gonna drink water all the time. That's gonna be my focus. I'm gonna focus on being healthy. So there's nothing beat around the bush. It's not saying I'm not praying that of what I don't want to do, praying for what I need to do and what I'm going to do, right? So it's straightforward. It focuses on the positive, and then that's what you draw into your life. Whereas if you focus on the negative and you don't want the negative to happen, chances are the negative is going to happen because that's all your energy is geared towards. That's all your energy is focused on. So chances are it's probably going to happen, right? Um, and so when you start looking at language, with the indigenous language, we're told that it's straightforward, it's direct. Um, as you start to examine Western philosophy and Western language and the English language, you start to understand that it is a man-made language. And when you look at all the indigenous languages of the world, it's the English language that's backwards. And the way you write the indigenous languages of the world is straightforward, direct, right? It's not backwards. But as you think in an English understanding and in an English way, and you start to write out the sentences in Cree, you're like, this looks backwards. So already you've been transformed and you've been programmed to think backwards, to speak backwards, to communicate backwards, to learn backwards. And you're taught that this is the correct way of forward learning, of this is the way of society. It's straightforward. You can beat around the bush. You can make up as much words as you want to. And in your mind, you think it's straight. You think it's forward. You think it's the correct way, right? You think it's not backwards. Um, that's what I've learned along the way. And within that understanding, growing up, when I knew the language and I spoke it fluently, it was because it came from home. And I didn't go to K4, didn't go to K5, and I could speak it. I spoke it fluently. I remember the songs. But as soon as I got to grade one, it was information wave. It was in an era where we weren't taught to speak the language. It was in an era where we weren't taught the history. It was in an era where everything was forced upon us to say that indigenous philosophies and ways were wrong. And so when you have that clash coming at you and you're now reprogramming your mind um, to move away from indigenous worldview and indigenous thought, that is very traumatic, right? And so in my little brain that was developing, I was only, you know, or five going on to six because I'm in grade one. So for two of those years, six to seven, um, that was that godlike stage. And in that godlike stage, I was greatly influenced by Western philosophy, but at the same time, too, it was at the end of the era of residential school. And then it was right in the end of that era, but it was also right in the end of when capital punishment was not allowed in the schools anymore. So because it was right in that era, they were still practicing capital punishment. They still had belts, whips. They still had roller sticks. They still used their fists, their hands. They would still push you in closets and lock you away. Um, so there was all these traumatic experiences for the first 2 to 3 years, mixed with this influence of backwards thought and programmed to think that that's straightforward. So for a big chunk of my life, it was hard to get the language back. It was hard to relearn the language. And as an adult, these are things that I had to identify, that I had to understand, and that helped me to really slowly start to grasp the language back, that it's not backwards, that I've been trained to think backwards. That's why this looks backwards to me. And as I start to make that connection again as an adult now, the language is so beautiful. There's so much aspects to the language. It's all encompassing. There's so much words that mean so much more. Um, and so for me, it's a constant practice. You know, to me, I'm a lifelong learner. I don't know all of the language fluently, but I'm still learning. And whatever I do learn, it's something that I hold dearly because I'm looking at it in a different way now, right? And so we have people that can speak the language fluently and don't some of them don't look at it in that way. They're like, oh, well, I can just speak it. It's another language, right? But when you start to look at that holistic approach and understand and examine, like this is how beautiful the language is, right? And just that song alone, it's definitely foundational. I find that my kids, as they go to pronunciate certain things, sometimes they'll try to follow the words, but if I show them just the symbol, then they attach that song sound to that syllabic. So then that way, instead of looking at a P and saying P, like pa, pa, pe, pi, po, they're not saying that, right? They're looking at the syllabic and they're saying, ba, be, bi, bo. So it's in between a P and a B, right? So it's not exact, detailed, correct pronunciation. There's a slight difference in the way that dialect is delivered, right? So for me, I'm finding the children are learning more. And an example of my little sister took Cree immersion for the first 3 years. And then when she went into a city school at grade 4, they found that her decoding skills were off the chart because um, she had an immersion program that taught her how to decipher certain things, right? And her ability to decode, to learn, to grasp new knowledge came that much more easier because she took an immersion program, right? And so the immersion program that she took was a project in Musquecheese, um, but it was very beneficial to her growth, and so that's a prime example of um, it how important it is um, to build on immersion programming. So, yeah.
Jerry, what is your goal now at work? Because you work with Louisville Children's Services.
To do everything. No. A little bit of everything. It's interesting because I did a PowerPoint and it was in regards to the organization as a whole. And in last year, I was supposed to do a placement program and describe, the whole placement, the whole organization, everything that I'm going through, and my experience. So I shared that with one of the coworkers about a month ago, maybe, and they were blown away because it was foundational. It was foundational knowledge. And so when I was able to share that, we have a new director. So the new director was like, everybody needs to know this. And then the elder was like, everybody needs to know this. So I actually just did that presentation on Monday. And so I did that for the entire staff. It was definitely a good presentation, definitely foundational. Um, so for me, as a cultural policy expert, I help a lot with the programming, the delivery of programming, staff support, parent support, community support, um, a little bit of all of those things. So for me, it's really like if I can be utilized in any possible way, like I will do my best to search out any avenue. And that's kind of the funny thing about us. my what is it? My first year practicum, I went to an organization where I'm only supposed to be looking after the NADAP section. And then I was looking after the elder section. I was looking after counseling. I was looking after staff supports. I was looking, and I'm just a first year practicum student, but yet they had me sitting in all of these roles basically and supporting, and in the most part taking the lead in all of these roles. And then it got to the point where I was just chatting with the director, and everything that we said in that conversation became the action plan for how the organization was going to move ahead. So like just basic things like that, that's the background that I come from in is the addictions field programming. So for me, it's like if I can help out in any way, then definitely bring in different insights to different areas and organizations. So yeah.
Jerry, your Tanse Hello Tanse song. Can you sing that, please? I loved it when you sang it. Please, please.
Yes, yes. So that was a cute one. One of the ones I forget who his name is, and I should know his name, but you can actually find that song online. So one of the cute things is it's a call and back response song. So it's hello, hello, dance, dance. How are you? How are you? Dance Don Sigia, I am fine. I am fine. Namoya Nantao, Namoya Nantao. Come on in, come on in. Beat the gwe, beat the gwe. Sit down, sit down. Ah, be, ah, be. Have some tea, have some tea. Maskiki guapwe mini gwe. And then they would respond, right? So it's just a call and response song. And you just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So definitely a good way to introduce beginners Cree and just simple terminology, right? And then another one is Dansatawiya, which is like, hello, how are you? Uh, Dansatawiya. Pokemon Nipo and Itsiga. So then that's me saying, hello, how are you? This is my name, right? And so you would just keep adding to that, adding to that, adding to that. But the call and response song, definitely a good one, a good tool to teach kids the language. Hi, hi.
Hi, Jerry. So here is an opportunity. Please, all of you are welcome to unmute or type your question in chat. Go ahead, please.